Occasionally, a game will come out that defines what you love about a certain genre of video games. MMORPGs, or massively multiplayer online role-playing games for the uninitiated, is a type of game that has been in my life since I first played Ultima Online in 1997. So, when it was announced that a Star Wars MMO was coming out in 2003, my mind exploded. My friend and I went to Walmart at midnight to pick up the game. Of course, they didn't have it on display yet, it was midnight, but we asked one of the stalkers if they had it in the back, and lo and behold, they did. He walked out with 2 copies. I've often said that Star Wars Galaxies is my favorite Star Wars game of all time. That is absolutely true. No ifs, ands, or buts about it. No question. Star Wars Galaxies is my personal perfect Star Wars game. Why? Well, Star Wars has always been a big open sandbox to me. I don't just want to watch the movies, I want to be a part of it. I want to play in the sand. Hence the reason that I own a full set of A New Hope Stormtrooper armor. I want to try to participate. So, Star Wars Galaxies isn't just a linear game. It's not a linear MMO where you level up and follow the same path that everyone else has followed. This is one of the most open, choose your own adventure, make your own fate sandbox games ever released. With that being said, the learning curve is steep. It can be very daunting when you plop into the game. Yeah, there are a few things pointing you in the right direction, but overall, you are a newborn baby without a mother who needs to learn to walk and talk on their own. There are 10 worlds you can travel to and explore, and the playable land on each world is enormous. There are grand cities you can walk around in and visit. There are areas to hone your combat and increase your skills, locations to collect resources for your non-combat professions, and the locations in between each of the major cities is free for your own personal use, meaning that Star Wars Galaxies is one of the few MMOs throughout the entire genre's history where players could build and furnish their own homes. You could literally have your own house and decorate it with all of your adventuring collectibles. And on top of that, players could even build their own cities. Yep, a guild could make their own city, a fully functional city, as functional as the main developer cities. Your guild city could have a bank, a cantina, spaceport, vendors to sell your own crafted goods, and even NPC guards patrolling the perimeter. Galaxies isn't an MMO where you just run through the motions. This is a game where pretty much anything you want to do, you can do. Galaxies is so expansive and different that every single style of gameplay is represented. People play Galaxies for way more than just the combat. Hell, I only played as a combat character for the first maybe a couple months of the game's release. I was a Tears Kasi, a hand-to-hand combat guy. But then I got bored of it, and I found that I enjoyed the community more. I just liked hanging out and interacting and going through the world. So I became a doctor. What I found enjoyable in the game was the community and the economy. I always felt like I was in a giant 3D chat room draped in Star Wars glory. The most fun I had was being a doctor in an enormous guild. I would often sit right here in the Mos Eisley spaceport. As a doctor, I could buff people. I could give them a little extra stat boost before they went out on their journey. Or I could heal people's wounds. So I would gather all the necessary resources I needed to give buffs to players, sit in Mos Eisley, call out on chat that I was selling buffs, and then a line of 30 or more players would form right in front of me, and they would all pay me to give them buffs. Then I would take those earnings and put them towards my guild city, maybe buy myself a new speeder, or furnish my home, help the guild expand ground and membership. See, the economy in Galaxies was completely player-run. The price for goods and services varied drastically from server to server. What would cost 5 credits on one server might cost 20 credits on another. The economy was completely driven by supply and demand, and what players set their prices at. I know this probably sounds boring as hell to a lot of you guys, but this is the type of MMO that I love. I have always felt held back with games like World of Warcraft and other linear MMOs like that. When it comes to my style of MMO, Star Wars Galaxies, so far, can't be beat. Now, Galaxies went through a lot of changes over the years. a lot. So I'm talking about the first 2 years in this video. I'll briefly talk about the changes that ultimately made the player base leave and killed the game. I'll get to that. But in the beginning of the game's release, it could take someone years to become a Jedi. Years. You couldn't just click a button during the character creation screen and become a Jedi. You had to work for it. Initially, it was a complete mystery on how someone would eventually become a Jedi. The only thing that the developers said was that certain in-game actions would unlock Force-sensitive character slots. That's it. That's all they said. That's the only clues we had to go on. That's the only hint that they gave. And then it was left for the players to figure it out. Eventually, it was discovered that the in-game action that was required was to reach master level in 4 random classes. The 4 classes were always random and completely unknown to the player base. And they might have been random on a character-by-character level, I'm not too sure. Needless to say, becoming a Jedi was the hardest thing to do in the game, but it was awesome. When you actually saw a Jedi, and trust me, it was extremely rare, you knew they were among the most dedicated Star Wars Galaxy players. It's kind of like my whole thing with lightsabers, right? When there are too many, it takes away from the coolness factor of them. Same goes with Jedi in Star Wars Galaxies. The rarity of a Jedi is what made them so unique and sought after. If you had 1,000 Jedi running around, the game would be dumb, but eventually that's kind of what it became. Again, I'll get into that. So, the game came out on June 26, 2003, and the first Force-sensitive character slot wasn't unlocked until 5 months later, in November. That's pretty crazy. So let's check out all the professions. There are, in this version of the game, I'm not too sure how all the expansions worked, but in this version of the game, there are 10 professions. And then within those professions, there are subclasses, higher professions. So like I said, I always played as a doctor. In order to become a doctor, I needed to complete the medic tree. I'd become a master medic and then start on the doctor tree. Or if I wanted to, I could complete the medic tree and the marksman tree and then access the combat medic tree. Before I was a doctor, I was actually an image designer. An image designer pretty much changes the way people look, hair, face, everything. And you might be asking yourself, why would anyone want to do that in a video game? I don't know, but I did. And it was fun. Like I said, the economy of this game and the overall interaction with other players is what I found fun. I had more fun sitting around with my guild, shooting the shit, and just walking around our city than I have in any kind of combat role in any other MMO I've ever played. But the combat in this game was way more in depth than most. You could become a bounty hunter and literally have to track down players that had bounties on their heads. You could become a politician and actually run for the mayor of your city. You could craft armor and weapons, set up a vendor, and sell your goods. And forever and ever, that armor and weapon that you made would have your name tagged on it. I could be known as the best armor smith in the entire galaxy, and people would want to come to me and get the HelloGreedo armor, which is kind of like how Ultima Online was, another one of my favorite MMOs. Crafting in Galaxies was enormous. It wasn't like modern MMOs where crafting is an afterthought. A player's entire job in the game could be to make shit. The possibilities were vast. You charted your own story. That's kind of how the entire skill system works. You pick a profession, and once you get that base profession maxed out, you can branch out and get way more specific with what you want to do. I miss this level of extreme customization in MMOs. It created a real community. Everyone had their own role. Your real-life interests could actually be reflected in a video game, in Star Wars. This is why Galaxies is my personal favorite Star Wars game of all time. Because you're not just playing as a Jedi. You're not just deployed as a stormtrooper or as Kyle Katarn going through the motions, going through the predetermined beats. You're actually creating the beats. You're living, not just playing, you're living in Star Wars. So that's pretty much a very basic look at Star Wars Galaxies. It's more of a passionate, nostalgic look at how these MMOs used to be. I could go deep with it. I could go into tiny details, but unless you actually get your hands dirty in the game itself, it's hard to explain how everything works. I mean, I really can't even show you guys much footage because my character is brand new and I don't have shit. If I could log into my old character from 2003 or 2004, I could have a lot of footage. If you want to play the game, just realize that your character's progress is long and exhausting. It is a grind, but man, The times I spent in Galaxies are some of my most cherished gaming memories. LAN parties with friends, just talking to random strangers and having interesting conversations, the commerce, the economy, going on these grand adventures. There's nothing like it nowadays. I haven't had as much fun in an MMO since Star Wars Galaxies. It's the last time that I felt like I was actually on an epic quest, living in a simulated world. The game was like being in the Wild West. Anything goes, do anything, go anywhere. Star Wars Galaxies and Ultima Online are two of my favorite MMOs of all time. They're similar in a lot of ways. I have been waiting a decade for a game to come along that offers this level of depth and freedom. Nothing has even come close. I've always said that World of Warcraft killed the MMO genre, and that often gets backlash because people say that there are more MMOs now than ever. While that is true, what I mean by WoW killed the MMO genre is that it took the grandness and complexity out of MMOs and turned everything into a watered-down linear product. Now, pretty much everyone does the same thing. Everyone goes down the same path. Everyone will eventually see that NPC or do the same quest, fight in the same dungeon, and run the same PvP arena over and over again. It's not about the lore or the world. It's about the grind. It's about getting that purple chest piece, the same chest piece that everyone else is eventually going to get. And then when they release the next expansion pack, you're going to need to go 10 more levels and get a even better chest piece. I don't know. That kind of shit just isn't for me. So what killed Star Wars Galaxies? Well, 2 years after its launch on November 15th, 2005, Sony Online Entertainment patched the game. This patch was called the New Game Enhancements. There was also a patch called the Combat Upgrade. These two shifts in the way the game worked changed everything. Jedi were no longer a rare character you'd see. All you had to do now was click Jedi on the character creation screen, and voila, you were a Padawan. Everything that Sony did with the changes turned the game into a complete watered-down WoW version of Galaxies. Most of the community that had played it since launch left, including me. It wasn't the same game anymore. It turned into something that tried to be like everything else, instead of embracing its uniqueness and appreciating the players who appreciated that uniqueness. But for those 2 years, before Sony turned it into a bucket of piss, Star Wars Galaxies was one of the most imaginative, unique, and interesting games I have ever played. For those 2 years, I had more fun in that MMO than I have had in all other MMOs in the past 12 years combined. All is not lost though. The official Star Wars Galaxy servers don't exist anymore. They were shut down in 2011, but you can still play the game on an emulated server. And the server has a pretty solid population. Most of the time that I log in, and I'm sure it varies quite a bit, but most of the time there are between 800 and 1,000 players playing. And that's usually on odd times, like in the morning, East Coast and whatnot. I'm sure it gets a lot more crowded. But if you're interested in playing, head to SWGEMU.com. There's a step-by-step guide on how you can get up and running. The EMU server actually takes Galaxies back to its original roots. It takes it back to the 2 years of glory. I can't recommend it enough. HelloGreedo, out.